Hello, everybody. On this episode of the EV Advisory Podcast, host JM Toriel, Plugin BC lead EV advisor, welcomes George Thompson, EV infrastructure manager from FortisBC, a key voice behind EV charger rebate program serving multi-unit buildings and workplaces across BC's southern interior. So together, they will unpack why charging where you live and work is the ultimate driver of EV adoption, with over 80% of charging expected to be happening at home. And they will also dive into why network charging systems matter, from the energy management and load shifting to unlock carbon credit value for buildings. See you then.
Welcome to the EV Advisory Podcast, where we provide authentic expert advice to residents and businesses across the beautiful province of British Columbia that want to install EV charging stations in their buildings. The EV Advisory is an official podcast of the EV Advisor program with myself as host, JM Toriel, at the Fraser Basin Council, whose location is at the Vancouver offices on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, also known as downtown Vancouver. The EV Advisor program is funded by the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions and the Government of British Columbia as part of the Clean BC Go Electric initiative. Our outreach mission through this podcast is to serve you, the listening public, with helpful advice through conversations with leading experts. George, what initially got you into the EV ecosystem?
It's a good question. Where I'd imagine the journey started for me officially was my time at FortisBC in our customer contact center group. Working in customer service, we were approached by a member of our existing EV team who had questions about how we were handling load requests. This was when the electric code first changed to allow demonstrated loads to avoid service upgrades. And that launched a really interesting set of questions and meetings that culminated in being invited to participate in an EV working group at FortisBC. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was first exposed and really got to see that the problem was more than just load requests. We needed to be thinking a lot more about the broader scope of customer experience as far as the electric vehicle adoption experience was concerned. And that was the jump off point for me.
But it was like you're already in FortisBC working,
yes.
And so now you've been working with the FortisBC EV Charger Rebate Program that we're in a working group together on, and that's specifically for MERBs and workplaces. Now, how would you describe the evolution, and like you mentioned the uptake and the customer service aspect, so obviously people, as we're buying more EVs in this territory, and maybe we should point out what the territory is. So we're now in Kelowna, so obviously Kelowna is part of your territory, but also part of the Kootenays, and basically right up to the border, almost like Trail, mm-hmm. and that Roseland area.
Yeah, we're a little bit of context. FortisBC serves electricity. FortisBC is a natural gas provider to much of British Columbia, mm-hmm. but we also operate the traditional West Kootenay Power region of the southern interior, which spans from the U.S. border north up to Kelowna in the west, as far west as Princeton, and as far east as Creston, north from Creston up Kootenay Lake to Caslow. Okay. We have about 180,000 homes and businesses that we serve in that area, and we're excited about having a diverse energy portfolio for British Columbians.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've noticed, EV adoption aside in numbers, the last time I was in Kelowna, there definitely weren't as many MERBs that you could see from quite a ways away. Just going over the bridge, from West Kelowna, you could definitely see there's a lot more multi-unit residential buildings that are part of the landscape now. But as far as the EVs themselves, what have you been noticing as far as like the the evolution of uptake and kind of the understanding of, you know, the people that you serve in this territory, as far as, you know, achievements that you've had with FortisBC and in terms of encouraging adoption?
I want to acknowledge first, Jam, really nice use of evolution. That's evolution.
Yes.
I'm with you. I see what you did there.
Nice.
We have we have the benefit in the interior. You'd say we lag, but I like to think of it that we have the opportunity to sort of look into the future as we observe how electric vehicle adoption is happening in the Lower Mainland, how it's happening in California, how it's happening in Quebec. We're seeing very similar things happening here, but we're seeing them happen a year or two later, and that's okay. You know, we're still catching up. We're still seeing really positive growth in electric vehicle penetration here in our service territory, particularly in Kelowna, where we sit right now, but also in other parts. The community of Nelson, for instance, is very quickly turning towards electric vehicles in their light-duty fleets, and we're seeing school districts across the area adopting electric school buses. So it's been a very inspiring experience of the last few years that I've been specifically involved in this portfolio, and but I know we have lots more work to do.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. I know, you know, a lot of people focus on the public charging, like what's available for the fast charging, you know, first. And it's kind of different to get people out of that mindset into more what would be more available in emerging workplaces, which our focus is like level 2 charging. So that's, you know, 240 or 208, right, volt charging. That's mostly intended for overnight charging, right? Yeah. And that's usually considered an ample power source for overnight charging, and also kind of secondary workplace charging. So for those businesses that want to put in charging for their employees, this rebate program would suit them as well. In your view, what are some of the key opportunities and barriers facing EV charging in the Fortis service area?
Well, the opportunity we know that we have is around emission reductions. We're very early in that stage. I said we're about 2 years lag from the Lower Mainland, and we know as a province we have a lot more room for improvement in terms of getting to where we want to be come 2050. We have opportunity, particularly as we start to think differently about transportation. You mentioned public charging as being sort of the first signal or the first indicator that electric transportation is possible to most consumers, especially as we get further along the adoption chain and start to see some of the early and late majority thinking about electric vehicles. If they're not seeing public charging in their communities, it becomes less likely that they're going to be thinking about putting one in their home. Right. But the opportunity is really to think differently. Yeah. We generally, when we're driving combustion engine vehicles, not thinking about having the opportunity to fuel at home, with the exception of those times where we might be filling some jerry cans because the price of gas dropped so far. But with electric vehicles, the opportunity is the convenience of being able to leave home every day with a full battery, a full tank of gas, if you will, as opposed to what you're experiencing today with a combustion vehicle. The challenge is, of course, having the entire value chain ready for that level of adoption. We know that it will be requiring more investment in on the utility side for supplying the energy, for bringing the infrastructure online that's going to allow for the full level of electric vehicles to be supported to do just that, charging at home. Right. But this also invites another opportunity, as electric vehicle charging loads can be flexible. And so I'm hoping we're going to talk more about managed charging or systems that can allow for charging to happen off-peak hours, but that is another fantastic opportunity to take advantage of times of the day where there is ample energy available to charge instead of turning the times where it's challenged.
Yeah, and actually that brings us perfectly into the next question, which is the importance of, you know, the networked charging which is a requirement for the program, is something that I think, people, when they're first kind of entering into getting EV charging potentially put into their building as a project, that they're not maybe seeing the value of what the network can do until it's already like in place and they're using it, and they're realizing, oh, it does billing, it does energy management, and you have power management, and it basically, the convenience factor that you brought into play there is such an important piece of like why people are making the switch, and once they do, they're not going back, right? It's they realize the benefits pretty quickly. It's a pretty quick learning curve. I can say that from experience myself, having driving EV since 2015 or so. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about the importance of network charging, and why level 2 communications is a requirement for eligibility in both the standalone rebate as well as the EV ready streams.
It's a complex question, truly, JM. The networking, up front, it does sound like we're expecting a more expensive charger to be purchased. We're expecting a charger network to be selected that's going to lead to ongoing operational costs and contracts or agreements between stratas, property managers, or the employers, if they're doing so for their workplaces. There is a reason for that, and it goes beyond just managed charging, because managed charging can be done without a network charger. You can do it with an actual connection to the EVs. But the difference between charger installations in workplaces and multi-unit residential buildings is that there isn't anything unilateral about the EVs themselves. These are vehicles that are owned and operated by individuals coming to work or coming to their homes who've made decisions about the kind of vehicle they want to own and drive. The charger is different in that respect. It might be owned by the resident, but it's being installed on common property, in a common electric system. And there is opportunity that opens up for potential with load shifting, but what the strata or the business really needs to rely on is a system that will be resilient and a system that will operate safely. With added benefits, the networking not only supplies the potential for energy management, load shifting, the incentives or the reduction to the utility rates that the strata or the business might pay as a result, which should arguably lead to lower rates for the resident or the employee to pay when using the chargers. But it also enables the strata or business to be able to actually know what's happening. The network connection not only gives them record of the historical usage of those chargers that they are then armed with to be able to claim carbon credits, to be able to justify continued investment before future strata boards for future owner groups. But they can also have real-time information. Without a network connection, the only way to know whether your charger is in use or working is by physically going down and looking at it. And so what you are getting is a more reliable, safe, and convenient system by having it network connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think along those kind of features that you mentioned for the benefits, like say the carbon credits, that obviously adds tremendous value. But just having the data that's measured, as far as what consumption is, who's consuming how much, and being able to determine that in like real time, as you mentioned, and annually potentially, right? So when you're potentially collecting the data to be able to put carbon credits to the market and have some kind of payback mechanism for the strata, then that is extremely beneficial and pretty well needed in order for it to come to fruition, right? So thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer.
I'd love to add to that just that there are a variety of flavors, if you will, to a network agreement. You indicated a few examples where the strata can see who is charging or can know how much is being charged by any vehicle. There are, there's more value available from some network providers than others, and then there are possible networks that if a strata is interested, savvy enough, that they can own and operate themselves, and possibly avoid subscription fees. Like a proprietary solution that gets purchased and is actually administrated by the strata or perhaps their existing building maintenance. So there is a broad spectrum of options that would fit the requirement of a networked charger, an active network charger for that minimum 2 years. It's expected with the rebate.
So the key is for stratas that are looking at entering into this is basically shop around, find out what's going to be good and well suited for your own needs for the building, because every building is different, and there might be electrical contractors that are more tuned into how the not so much the network and the station, but how much the electrical feeds into the building, and they might be very good at that, but they might not know so much about what networks are good for what type of features that they're looking for. So it's really important to shop around, I think, is good advice that we always give as EV advisors. To at least get 3 quotes is usually what I say minimum. On that note, I always advise those reaching out to us as EV advisors that when beginning the project of installing EV charging, they should first conduct an EV-ready plan, or what's called the EPR, or the Electrical Planning Report, needed by most stratas to conduct for compliance with the Ministry of Housing. Would you agree that this process helps residents living in MURBs to have a better understanding of their future electrical needs and provides a better basis for contractors, for example, during retrofits for EV charging in shared parkades? And are there some good examples of things you look for in EV ready plans? The sort of initial phase of going EV ready, which we haven't really defined here, but basically each resident would have to have access to level 2 network charging, at least the electrical, right, for level 2 within 5 meters, right? So that's kind of, new buildings are predominantly that way, at least in the Metro Vancouver territory, where we live in the BC Hydro territory. But is this something that you're seeing as well, that like basically going through that process of like getting the plan done, even if it was done for a standalone application, going through that initial process of like designing, having the contractors design the setup of the electrical prior to actually, putting any charging infrastructure in. Like the last real phase should be putting the charger in. So maybe if you could just talk about the importance of the plan.
Yeah, I think it's natural for the charger conversation to be where most stratas start, because it's probably starting with the resident who's moving in, who already has an EV, or an existing resident who's planning to buy one or already has, and wants that added advantage, the added benefit, really the best benefit of owning and driving an electric vehicle, which is the convenience of charging at home. And we expect that more than 80% of charging is going to happen at our homes. Yeah. And as utilities, FortisBC would love to see that happen, because it brings the opportunity we talked about earlier to have that charging happen at night. When that conversation starts about the single charger, it shouldn't be shut down. That's an opportunity to further the conversation, potentially pump the brakes of the EV a little bit. Say, do we as a strata really understand what it's going to look like when not just resident 1 or owner 1 is asking for a charger, but when owner 10, owner 50 is asking for one. Yeah. And the electric vehicle, the EV ready plan is designed to make that experience as amicable as possible between resident 1 and resident 50. The inner workings of it are built now as requirements to be an approved plan, but it's really done in a way that creates the best practice of the most fair distribution of costs associated to bringing charging at least one charger per residential dwelling, one parking stall. The reality is it de-risks that decision to put the first charger in, because having the plan means that first charger, even if it's going to be the only one the strata installs, they expect to install for the next 10 years, that first charger will be done in line with that plan. And that means charger 2 can also be done that way. The risk is any chargers that are installed before it may not align to that plan, or they might force a less optimized approach based on existing chargers when planning happens. So I completely agree that the best course of action, even though there is a cost associated with it, is to start with a plan to get an idea of what's available. And one of the, you asked for a couple of the elements of the plan that I really look for. Though it's not required, it's always assuring to see that the developer of a plan has approached the utility and asked about existing capacity. Yeah. There are ways for developers of EV-ready plans and electric planning reports to do their assessment without having to approach, but that option is available. And so we encourage both the planners who are designing these as well as stratas to be informed and expect that the utility is approached to understand that capacity that's currently available. The other piece that is a requirement in the plan but is done differently by the developers of them is around understanding how the strata is planning to charge from a driver need perspective. And we categorize that in the plan as the minimum charging requirement, which means that based on how owners or residents of this strata are going to move, they are expected to have a certain number or a certain amount of kilowatt hours that they need to have available for charging every night, or perhaps every week, depending on how they do it. There are ways to incorporate that in the plan from a federal level. Stats Canada has kind of put together a standard approach to that is often used in the plans. But developers of plans can also either be expected to, in the scope of the Stratas project, or do it themselves to add additional value, actually look closely at each unique strata and determine if that standard Stats Can approach is the right one, or if there's maybe some anomalies with this particular strata because they have a higher tendency to travel more broadly if the strata is maybe a little bit more rural than the average urban strata. So those are two notes that I generally call out and encourage in EV-ready planning for stratas to get ahead of.
Yeah, good point. And in this territory in particular, I think it is tending to be more rural, and I would think that the residents and employees and workplaces might have more of a commute as far as distance. So that should play into the capacity piece quite a bit as well. And the notion of the technology and how much it's evolved, getting back to that evolution. So it's really up to the engineers or the electrical contractors that are doing the plans to kind of take all that data, all that information, hopefully through surveys that we try to provide people through the EV Advisor service as well, so that they have a much better idea of maybe not even just now, but like future proofing, right? So they don't have to buy an EV right away, right? If they're not ready, that's fine, and if they don't have to have a charger in their spot, right? But just knowing the benefit of new buildings, at least again, most jurisdictions in the Metro Vancouver area, I believe Nanaimo and I believe Kelowna now have new buildings that are EV ready, right? So
Yep.
mostly since 2022.
It was April 1st, 2024.
There you go. Okay.
It's an EV ready bylaw for builds in Kelowna, and there are discussions about more bylaws happening in FortisBC's territory from other jurisdictions.
Okay.
I'm sure it's the start to that. I wanted to backtrack a little bit to the EV ready plan, and you said something that resonated with me around understanding the value of that, and how even if you're not buying an EV, there's value.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to emphasize that as a resident who does not have an EV or is not even expecting to ever own one, the EV ready plan should be most important, because any money from that point on that me as an owner am having to spend on EV charging, I want to know is done as efficiently as possible. So if a standalone charger is being installed and one owner is saying they will pay every dollar of that, that might not sound like it's impacting you in any way, but it can have a downstream impact to you at a later date. Where if you have a plan and you contribute, which after you get that $3,000 rebate, depending on how many owners are in your strata group, it's fairly little to have that plan developed.
Yeah.
You are now armed with knowledge to ask the right questions in the future when an EV infrastructure project is being proposed,
There you go.
or when a standalone charger is being proposed.
Mm-hmm.
That should lead to you having to pay less. And I know this is about encouraging EV chargers, but it starts with the planning. And I also believe that by doing the planning and starting to see how the investment into this infrastructure might impact you individually, you might actually start to realize it's more reachable than you thought it was as an owner. And that the value that it brings, like you mentioned, the investment in that infrastructure, even if it is just the circuit to within 5 meters of your stall, you have added considerable equity to your investment in your strata property.
Absolutely. Okay. So most level 2 EVSE chargers, I like to use the term EVSE because the supply equipment, the electric vehicle supply equipment, is technically the right term for what most people consider EV chargers, because being an EV nerd and having driven an EV for a while now, the chargers in the vehicle, right? It basically takes the AC power that's coming from the grid, going through that supply equipment into your vehicle, and then your vehicle converts it to DC, which then charges your vehicle. So just a little pointer out there.
If you want to sound like an EV nerd, you could definitely drop that one. And it certainly makes vehicle manufacturers and those manufacturing and supply equipment, it kind of lets them puff up their chest a bit when they know you're talking to somebody who understands the difference. But
yeah, it's true, because I mean, I know that there's like, a lot of like YouTube channels that I watch that are totally focused on EVs and charging and things like that, and they'll be sticklers about it because they know that they're going to get comments from the public, whereas it's not an EV charger. But for the context of this program, which is called the EV Charger Rebate Program, we're going to use that also.
Can we just say it, Jam?
Yeah.
This is confusing.
It is.
We know that.
Yeah.
And it is most obvious with relation to the transition of electric vehicles and the maturity of this as a technology. None of us recall the transition of the nozzle for a gas pump,
right,
or the regulated standards of pressure that you fuel at.
Yep.
We go to a gas pump and expect it's going to fit into the nozzle for our gas tank. There's no question of that. Charging today is not quite the same.
Right.
There are a number of different standards as this technology has come online, and those have started to evolve. We're already seeing one of the original standards for fast charging, at least DC fast charging, the CHAdeMO port,
right,
starting to phase out.
Yes.
Originally brought to us from Japan and Korea. it is now, newer supply equipment, newer chargers, you can't even have them ordered with a CHAdeMO plug. And the J1772, the J plug, which is our level 2, it was a program requirement for this up until quite recently. And the alternative, which is the Tesla plug you're referring to, the J3400, was seen as proprietary until quite recently as well.
That's right.
But now we're witnessing an evolution, another evolution.
Yeah, well said. And I was just at the Everything Electric show just this past weekend, and the new Nissan Leaf was there, and you're starting to see the North American standard, or NACS, the North American Charging Standard, which is basically the Tesla standard of the J3400, as you mentioned, is now incorporated in the vehicle, right? So it's not something you need an adapter for. But there's many, just on my drive up here from Kelowna, I noticed at the Tesla supercharger station I was at in Hope that there were at least 3 other vehicles that were not Tesla, plugging in. So there is, again, the evolution is it's happening, and it's not as bad as I think people may have thought it was, where everything just switches like overnight. It's never how it happens, right?
No.
With technology.
Making the choice at the beginning is it might sound daunting, not knowing which direction to go with the North American Charging Standard or the J plug configuration. The reality is you're not going to choose something that's going to work for everyone on its own. But that doesn't mean that you need to replace the cord. That doesn't mean you need to rip and replace the charger at all. There are adapters, like you said, that can enable either of those to work for the opposite port on the EV. So if it is a designated stall for a resident of a strata, or if it's employees coming to work, really what's important is just making sure they're aware of which standard you have. They're very commonly available. Tesla's vehicles have been fitted with the North American Charging Standard the entire time. There's now, like anything model year 26 onward, from a majority of manufacturers is now expecting to be North American Charging Standard. And there are still older vehicles that don't work for either, but they're less common. And we're seeing this evolution. Eventually those vehicles are going to be off the road. The other thing I just wanted to indicate is that having a plan to replace that cable is important just from regular maintenance, safe operation perspective. But that having a plan to replace it just because somebody might be moving into a stall with a different plug option is not really necessary. These are major appliances. They last about as long as hot water tanks. They can last longer if they're well taken care of and used. But you can make that decision in the future when the charger is being replaced. And that might be a time to move on to the North American Charging Standard.
That's reassuring. So retrofitting multi-unit residential buildings, I like to use the term MURBs, to install EV charging can be a complex process. As we know.
Yes.
In your experience, what are some of the key learnings from some of the MURB EV charging projects that you've seen in Fortis territory as you go through the kind of process of seeing the applications come through, maybe going to the buildings once the work has been done and doing inspections, seeing if it's done accordingly and whatnot? What comes up for you in that process?
I think one of the most impactful stories that we've heard a few times is when a strata has decided to approach their charging strategy as standalone first, and then decided to plan for EV ready later. And this is where some risk was taken on that might have influenced a direction for their EV ready plan as a result of decisions that were made during the standalone installation. Something as simple as standalone chargers being installed that were from a variety of manufacturers that now are not interoperable with one another. When the EV Ready plan was coming forward, now there's a need for perhaps a managed charging system that those previously installed chargers need to be able to connect to. So this is one example of a firm learning the value of starting with EV Ready planning before going into a standalone install or even EV Ready infrastructure, of course, to ensure that you're making the right decisions early. The other is around the ownership group themselves. When standalone chargers are installed first, those are usually because of the motivation or the encouragement of highly motivated owners. And even in the case of business installations for employee chargers, those could be highly motivated employees that are helping champion that cause to get that charger installed. But without a plan, and now that you perhaps want to proceed with a plan, you might lose the highly motivated owner's support for that future work if they already have what they want. So the most key learning is really the stratas that have started with a plan end up with a more seamless and more resilient charging strategy once they start installing. One that really does align with that amicable approach. And the other is just how important it is to make sure you're labeling your junction boxes as expected in the EV Ready plan.
Yes.
But once deployed, you really want to make sure that those are only going to be used for EV charging. Whatever controls the strata needs to put in to ensure that there's not a desire to repurpose that circuitry, as it can impact the charging management or strategy in the future if there's some other use case and some other duty cycle that's pulling on that system.
Yeah, really good point. Let's talk a little bit more about workplace charging. So charging in the workplace is a great opportunity for EV drivers to get additional power for their vehicles while they're at work. What do you see as some of the key opportunities and or barriers for workplace charging, and what are some of the key successes you have seen from the EV charger rebate program for workplaces specifically?
I think we could echo a lot of what we talked about in the multi-unit residential space. I'd say it's largely a little bit less complex to install charging for a workplace than it is a strata, because you have to convince decision makers the same way you do in a strata, but the decision makers are a little bit more aligned. They have common interests involved. An opportunity that we really can't undersell is how a willingness or a desire to have chargers brought in for employees goes beyond just electric transportation. It is a fantastic way for an employer to signal a desire for sustainability, emission reductions, employee health and well-being, and even helping employees save money. As the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle, once you're running that, it starts to add up really quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thinking about those components in mind, as an employer, having a charging strategy and taking advantage of CleanBC's workplace charging program is a great way to help demonstrate and engage employees and show that you want to give them opportunity. The opportunity as well, not every employee is going to have access to charging at home. If they don't have access to charging at home and they don't have access to charging at work, then the only option is public charging, which is more expensive, is at risk of congestion, and oftentimes it alone can be a challenge for the actual longevity of the vehicle. So the employer's willingness to participate in bringing chargers online for their employees goes beyond just helping with electric vehicle adoption. And I think that's the main point I want to underpin. We can talk a little bit more about how we've also seen examples where employers have brought in employee chargers, as a result have started to think about electrifying their own fleets. Or the opposite happens. They've started electrifying their fleets, employees are trying some of their fleet vehicles, and now they're thinking about buying their own. And so it really does start to create that full ecosystem as the desire improves, as some of the challenges demystify, and an employer might have an easier access to charging, a faster pathway to bringing charges to their employees than they might be able to find at home.
Well said.
And I mean, talking about network chargers, like this is a challenge for the employer to understand. They are going to be adding load likely to their system when their business is at its highest loads already. Mm-hmm. So having network chargers in the workplace ensures that the employer can balance those loads next to their existing demands or provide new services, but also see in real time that the chargers are available for their employees, to understand that they're being used. And an employer as well can collect the data from their network to claim carbon credits.
There you go, yeah. Given there's a comprehensive list of eligible networked EVSE or EV chargers available for this rebate program, is there some wisdom you could share for the listeners out there that are seeking energy management solutions and may not yet understand the benefits of network chargers and energy management systems for their buildings? And what are some of the key advantages of these technologies?
There's really, I'd say the comparison starts with an environment that has an energy management option and one that doesn't. When you bring an energy management system into the equation, you bring with it flexibility. The options now become available to you depending on the type of system that you select, about whether you care most about ensuring minimum supplies of energy are given to every charger. There are some dynamic systems that can even determine that minimum based on how much power that particular vehicle will need, or the time of day in which it's being plugged in, or how many vehicles are plugged in at that given time. There are also opportunities that open up with energy management systems and electric vehicles where you can tie in stationary storage, or you can start to bring forward strategies that can actually allow the vehicles that are plugged in on these chargers to become an energy source for a building. This is a little bit harder, and I mean, we can talk about vehicle to grid later, but this has some very real applications in the future. Without an energy management system, it doesn't happen. It's an essential component of that ecosystem to enable that kind of technology from working. Yeah. The piece I want to add is that there is a thought that an energy management system, it's very, very similar to what I was describing earlier with respect to the degrees of options for creating certain aspects of an EV ready plan. Mm-hmm. There are systems that are quite simple, very simple energy management systems that can bring a lot of value online just by not allowing loads to exceed a certain level. By doing so, it can enable an EV charging system from being added without any need for a service upgrade, depending on the existing capacity on that electric service. And like the simplest of systems can do that. The more dynamic and exciting that they get, generally the more costly they become. Right. But that cost might be worthwhile when you compare it to what it might be to upgrade your service or add brand new services to a multi-unit residential building complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you and your team at FortisBC approach a MERB or workplace building at the end of the project? So once the installations have been completed, what comes next?
well, a really exciting thing comes next. After the installations are completed, we love seeing that final application arrive, because that is the signal that we receive to start calculating the actual rebate that we're going to be able to give to that strata to offset the costs up to 50%. Beyond that, beyond the exciting moment of reviewing the plan, and most stratas are pretty fantastic about bringing all the documentation forward that's required. These are pretty substantial rebates, so an application form filled out is probably not all you're going to require. We're going to need some invoices, we're going to need some photos of chargers being installed. Yep. But in many cases, we also, in the best interest of the strata, will visit the property either as FortisBC or with our trusted partners to validate that what was installed, the as-built, aligns with the EV Ready plan to supply what was expected. So we come in and do that as a cost to the program itself. This is inherently involved. It sounds like an inspection, it kind of is, but we have an opportunity at that point to provide the strata with feedback if there's something inherently different from what they expected to receive.
Right.
And really the aim is the same as when we're providing funding on the EV Ready plan. So we want them to have a solution that will work. Even if the strata deviated from the original plan, something else would need to be done in order to design the system. Something more akin to a line drawing for actual construction, which is far more involved and reliable than the plan itself. The plan would give a starting point, would give a scope to enable that line drawing, but you're absolutely right. There are instances where the contractor who comes in might be different, or enough time has passed where there could be new solutions available where they're recommending a change from the plan that was written. That is fine. That's totally fine, but we will need, as program advisors, to be brought into the loop on that so that we can ensure that that's what we're inspecting against. The EV Ready infrastructure rebate itself, a prerequisite for that is that you have an EV Ready plan approved. Doesn't mean the EV Ready plan was funded. You just have to have one that is approved to proceed with infrastructure to be eligible for the rebate. It also doesn't mean it's approved as, code or bylaw or anything like that. We're not going to override the electrical contractor for that approval's sake. It just means it's meeting the parameters of what would enable EV infrastructure funding, EV Ready infrastructure funding.
Makes sense. So that actually comes to my next question, which is going to be like top 3 models. Like what would you say are the, if price wasn't a factor, what would be your top 3 choices for EVs?
Well, maybe I'll do one better, because I'll keep prices. Price is not an option. Porsche Taycan. I stop every time I see one. We've got several of them. I see them charging from time to time at our network here. Nice. They are beautiful. They are not in my price range. No. There are, I mentioned that the document on Plug-in BC, counting the number of vehicles that are on there that are under $40,000 new now. And what I really appreciate is the references to the used vehicle market, because that is growing. Yes. But if I was to say the affordable option, one that's in my price range under $40,000, I love that Fiat 500e. That's such a punchy little car, and great lines, nice size battery for its size, and it can actually charge pretty decent. Like it's getting up to that average 75 kilowatt charge capacity. So good convenient solution. That's number 2. And then my favorite, it still sits in my mind because it was the first time I sat in an electric vehicle and experienced G-force, was the Ioniq 5. Nice. I'm a big fan of I'm an 80s kid, so it harkens back to that DeLorean line and 80s synthwave. But it is a fast little car, and it charges very, like if you're looking for convenient fast speeds, it's at par with Tesla from a capability on the road, and it has pretty good range.
Yeah, charging curves. I think Blake went into that quite a bit. As well, in the interview with him. So yeah, I mean, Taycan would be my top choice as well, I have to say.
Yeah?
So, yeah.
Right.
If price wasn't enough.
One day, Jim.
Maybe a used one will come my way, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll keep my eyes on Kijiji, we'll see.
Yeah.
Even an opportunity to test drive one, if they'd actually let me test drive one, that'd be fun. Was
Yeah.
that at Everything Electric?
They're on display, but I don't
Yeah,
think you can test drive them.
No ride and drive up.
There were at least 3.
Yeah.
I mean, I did sit in one, so.
Nice. Yeah, that counts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of diversity in the options. There's probably something there for everyone now. Truck models, you actually have choice. It's not just we got to start breaking people out of the notion that it's only Ford Lightnings that are in the truck class. You've got Silverado, you've got GMC Sierra, Chevy Silverado, GMC Sierra, and you know we did hear that Dodge has dropped, at least for now, its Ram EV. But I mean, there's a great report that I follow from Bloomberg NEF, comes out with great annual EV update, global perspective, and talks about where we're at in terms of price parity of EVs by region. And it becomes really telling. You start to see which areas of the globe are figuring out how to capitalize most on the value chain of EVs. Of course, China's at the top, but they're finding a way to supply countries where you would normally think an electric vehicle is a luxury item. They're challenging that notion because we're seeing adoption of electric vehicles rise now, and they're supplied Thailand, to name an example, where you wouldn't traditionally see or expect to see an upswing, a significant upswing in luxury vehicle purchases, because they aren't. They are affordable purchases when done that way. And we're coming down. Like Canada is down. I think we're closer to now 40%, where not too many years ago we were 80%. Price difference between an EV and a similar class combustion engine. The other thing I really want to include that I always throw out there to demystify this is that I mentioned there's models that are under $40,000. When you compare the average price of those vehicles to the average price of new vehicles at large, there are more than 40 models that come in at the average new vehicle price or lower in a full electric drivetrain. So it's an easy story to share when you're comparing the price of a Kona combustion version to a full electric, or a Kia, where they have the option. You can choose to buy either full battery electric or full combustion. Yes, you're going to see the difference in price today in Canada. But when you're comparing that full electric to a similar class of other makes and models, it gets a lot closer in price.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know this is kind of the topic of the moment, so it may be different by the time people are listening to this or viewing this. But obviously the tariffs on Chinese imports, mentioning the Chinese vehicles that are coming online globally. We were so much embedded in the U.S., well, the North American, like Mexico, Canada, and United States, as far as the auto sector, where you hear of like parts going across the border umpteen times, like before the vehicle's actually made, right? So that notion is really fading away quickly, and of course it's not good news for the auto sector in Ontario, but we're here in BC. We don't really have any auto manufacturing of any kind, but I kind of see a moment here where that might not be the case. Like if we can negotiate some kind of settlement, you may see like a BYD in Abbotsford or Richmond or something like that, where we're actually producing vehicles here too. And that's an exciting prospect. But not only looking across the Pacific that way, but the other way to Europe, a lot of the vehicles that haven't been available to Canada may become available. Why not? And I think there's certain think tanks that are proposing that, very, very option. And I would really love to see that, to be honest. Like I'm also a French citizen, so European. Like I'm definitely European. I love the European brands out there. I'd love to see a Renault 5 on the streets here. That would probably be one of my 3 choices at this point.
Yeah.
But those are all affordable options that really should be available here too.
Yeah.
We don't have to necessarily be protecting the North American industry so much if we're wanting to really increase adoption to the speed that we have been. And yes, there's been a bit of a slowdown, but I anticipate that's going to level out. And in other parts of the world, it hasn't slowed down. It's still going, gangbusters. And I think everywhere except North America, definitely on the Chinese manufacturing side, they're everywhere. They're getting everywhere, and it's happening very quickly at places like Australia and New Zealand. Yeah, I think we're nearly there. And I'm originally coming from Saskatchewan. Canola is a very important commodity that is the big seller for countries like China. Those farmers would love to have that tariff come down as well. So who knows? It's kind of like all in the air right now, but lots of things in play. But it's an interesting time to at least be an EV nerd as I refer to myself. But how do you see it?
I think Ontario is going to surprise us.
Mm.
I think that we're seeing this through the lens of preserving what has always been.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I think jobs are very important to preserve. This is George's opinion.
Yes.
But to think that the only way to do that is by continuing to manufacture cars the same way we do today, I think we lose some of the opportunities that this starts to present. A car does not necessarily have to be fully manufactured in a place to be valuable to us for trade, with or without tariffs. We've already proven that in our track record of trade with Mexico and the U.S. Does that open an opportunity to do manufacturing more effectively of some important component? Let's say batteries, for instance, here locally in those factories with those workers that we already have
with the supply
involved,
chains as well,
and the supply chain,
because we have a lot of those metals, we have a lot of those raw materials. Yeah.
These are questions that I'm sure are already being asked and explored. Opportunities we've seen, certainly some of which have come and gone around manufacturing, but it's this sudden momentum shift is not necessarily a signal that we should turn away from the work that we're doing. It is a slowdown. As a utility, this gives us opportunity to better plan, to invest now before that need really arrives, to build programs that are more supportive once that need arrives. There's this program itself to make sure its funding is still available and this opportunity is still present for those who are taking this journey. And it is absolutely still important work. And the investments that are being made by our multi-unit residential building stratas, property managers, businesses for their employees are still worthwhile.
Absolutely. Last question. If you were to have one wish or a magic wand, what would you change?
Right now?
Right now, yeah.
I would fast track, wand wave, fast track battery technology maybe 4 years so that we have ideally some significant advancements that we're expecting in chemistry, in cost makeup, solid state, that will further lead to reductions, even with tariffs. That would make electric vehicles more affordable. That would make them easier to charge with less power. That would become really a slam dunk when you're going to the dealership or you're looking for that used vehicle in making a decision on what to buy.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I'd like to see, all those things transpire, and I believe they will. And I think it's going to happen sooner than a lot of people anticipate, even with the slowdown. And it's exciting to educate people on that, when they start with an email, sending to the EV Advisor program like our team, and want to get advice on how to do that, then these things come up and we can get excited about it and lead them in the right direction, hopefully. And so hopefully more people will benefit from these types of educational conversations as well, and take some good informative tidbits to hopefully bring to their stratas or workplaces and get it going. Awesome. Thanks so much, George. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Jam. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Great chatting with you, and thanks again for joining me here in Kelowna. Plug-in BC strives to inform you with expert advice to assist you with your EV charging needs. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you get your podcasts or on this YouTube channel. Plug-in BC on our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also check us out on our informative website at pluginbc.ca, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. I'm Toriel, advising you to plug in BC.